Alrighty, well, good morning, everybody. There's Rocky. He's having a sleep there. He's got his little head on the pillow. Quite a cat. Quite a cat he is. He's wonderful. Anyway, yesterday wasn't a great day, but it's today now, so we'll see how it goes. I'm kind of tired and not feeling the greatest. I was up at 2 o'clock in the morning cold because the hot water bags didn't really do the job because they weren't really, I didn't have the right number, and also they were not, one of them really was just warm when I put it in the bed. It wasn't really hot, so it did make a difference anyway. And I was up cold, and I was up until around 4:35 in the morning before I went back to sleep. So I did sleep in a little bit this morning. It's now um well, I woke up around 9:30. It's now shortly after 10. um Anyway, I have mentioned in some other videos, I made the analogy of the mule driver with the carrot in the stick. And some of my other videos, if you've watched them, you'll see I've used that analogy to talk about how things are now in our world now, how this old-fashioned picture of the carrot in the stick, and how it applies in modern times. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a story. There's a reason I use that analogy, and it goes back to a story that I heard when I was young, and it's a story that made an impression on me. It's a story about character, and it's a story about how your character can affect you in various ways throughout your life. And it's a story, too, about never assuming that you're not being watched or scrutinized, because you know, people are observing even when they don't appear to be. So it's a story about all that, anyway. So without further ado, because as you know, I don't like ado. We talked about this before. I don't like any ado in my videos. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to tell you the story. This story is set back in the olden times, before there were trucks and cars and buses and things like that, when the people relied on beasts of burden to transport themselves and their goods, you know. Um, it's set in rural England, a little village in England, way back in like I say, in the days of the horse-drawn cart and the mule cart and so on. Um, you know, prior to the internal combustion engine. And as I mentioned in previous videos, what a mule driver would do is he'd have a long pole, a stick, and this is where the analogy of the carrot and the stick comes from, because the carrot's a reward, but the pole could also be used to beat the animal. So the pole had the carrot tied to the end of it, but it was also a weapon. It could be used to beat the animal. And some mule drivers use more carrot, some use more stick, depending on the personality of the man sitting up on the seat of the cart. But if you were a mule, and you were a fortunate mule, then you got a kind master who preferred to use the carrot over the stick. And a man who was of good character would always much rather resort to the carrot than to the stick. Anyway, a mule doesn't give a flying you-know-what if you get into town. A mule doesn't care if your cart and your goods and yourself get into town. Doesn't matter to the mule. The mule doesn't even have the capacity to understand about things like that. But a mule loves carrots. So you hang the carrot off the stick and you dangle it just out of reach, and the mule will follow the carrot. And in doing so, the mule will walk one step at a time trying to get to the carrot, because again, the mule is stupid And the mule doesn't understand that the carrot's always going to be out of reach. So the mule will follow the carrot. Now, if you want to turn right, you just move your stick to the right, and the mule will follow it around the corner, you know, and stuff. But you want to go left, you do the same thing, only you move the stick to the left. And so that's how you steer your cart. Anyway, it was always said that you could judge a man's character, though, if a mule driver specifically, you could judge the man's character by whether or not he would let the mule have the carrot at the end of the journey. You could tell a lot about the guy by just watch and see if he'd let the mule have the carrot. Anyway, here's the story. There was this mule driver. He lived in a little village in England in the old days when beasts of burden were the conveyance. And he had a contract where he moved goods from a manufacturing concern that was within this village to a railroad yard, to a train station, so that the goods could be loaded onto boxcars and shipped, around the country to the people who needed them. And anyway, this mule driver, he was well known in the village. His mule and his cart and himself were a fixture in that place. And, he was very well known there. But, of course, in those days, you very seldom left your area. So neighboring villages, you'd be well known where you came from, but you wouldn't be known at all in another place, because you just didn't go anywhere. You just were in the place you came from, pretty much. Anyway, what happened was, though, a very beautiful young lady came from another village to stay with her aunt, who was sickly. Her aunt was recovering from an illness, and she wasn't able to stay by herself. She was a spinster. She didn't have any daughters of her own to look after her. So her brother sent his daughter, her niece, to look after her. And like I say, she was from a neighboring village, so she wasn't known in this village where her aunt lived. And again, she wasn't known in that village, nor did she know anybody in that village other than her aunt. And only knew her mostly just through letters and whatnot, because again, people didn't travel in those days like they do now. Anyway, so she gets sent to her aunt's house to look after her while she recuperates from this illness. And while she's in the village, she gets sent out sometimes to do the shopping and whatnot, and she meets, by chance, the young man who drives the mule cart. And they get to know each other over the course of a few weeks, and they fall in love. And they decide they want to get married. Now, in those days, you just didn't get married. That wasn't how it was done. You had to go, if you were the young man, you had to go and ask the young lady's father for permission. You didn't just marry a man's daughter, and that would be unseemly. You didn't do that. You had to go and you had to get her father's blessing. So, the young man traveled to the neighboring village, which again wasn't the norm, but given the circumstances, he traveled to the neighboring village. And he went to the father's house. He knocks on the door. The family receives him warmly. They're hospitable to him. The father says, yes, he said, my daughter has spoken to me of you. He says, she speaks highly of you. He said, come into the parlor and we'll have a chat man to man. And, I want to get to know you a little better. So they go into the parlor together. They sit there. And the father and the young man, they have a good talk. The young man, he tells the father, he said, well, sir, the reason I'm here is, as you know, your daughter and I have become acquainted, and I wish to ask you for her hand in marriage. And the old man, he says, oh, he said, okay, yes. He said, well, you seem like a nice young man. He said, I need to ask you some questions, though. He said, I understand from my daughter, did you have employment? He says, yes, sir. He said, I drive a mule cart, and I make a good living. He said, I will be able to take care of your daughter, and I'll be able to take care of any children we will have, no problems there. The old man says, well, that's very good. I'm glad to hear that. Um, that does make a big difference, in my decision. He said, asked him a few more questions about his family and his background and, all that business. And then he said, well, really, I can't give you an answer today. He said, I'm going to need some time to think about it. He said, will you be able to come back here next week and see me? And he said, I give you my word as a gentleman, sir, I will have an answer for you then, and it'll be a firm answer. He said, so far I like you. So he said, but he said, I don't want to just, this is a serious thing. This is my daughter. So he said, I want to be sure about you before I give you my final answer, because I never want to deprive my daughter of a good man, nor do I want to saddle her with a bad man. you know, he said, I have no reason at this point to think you're a bad man, but still, I need some time to consider it. The young man said, no problem, sir. I will come back next week to see you, and I'm looking forward to it. The old man said, as am I. So he said, anyway, goodbye, safe journey home. And yes, come back and see me next week, and I will have a firm answer for you. So the young man went back to his village, and he went about his business. He did his work. The following week, he comes back to see the father, like he had promised, to see the girl's father. And again, he's invited in warmly. They sit in the parlor together like they did the week before. And the father says, so, young man, he said, I guess I should get straight down to business. He said, I have seriously considered your proposition. And he said, unfortunately, I'm going to have to say no. You may not marry my daughter. And the young man, he was kind of shocked, the young mule driver. He says, really? He said, what? Why? He said, I don't understand, sir. He said, I thought we were getting along so well. He said, I don't understand. Well, the father said, I'm going to tell you something. He said, you're from a neighboring village. You came here, I knew nothing about you. Now, he said, you presented yourself very well, he said, and good for you for doing that, he said, and you did. You were very respectful. You answered my questions forthrightly. I'm appreciative of that. And he said, really, I told you when you left here that I thought I liked you, and I genuinely did. He said, I wasn't having you on or anything. You made a really good impression. But he said, you really did. You made a good impression on me. I was impressed with you. And I was leaning towards allowing you to marry my daughter. But he said, you got to bear in mind, I'm no fool. I've been around, I know how the world works. I know how people are. And I knew you would come here on your best behavior. I knew that you would be anxious to make a good impression on me, which you did. As I said, you did make a good impression on me. However, I also know that you would do that because that's what anybody does when they want something. So he said, I didn't assume that the impression you made was accurate and just take it on its face value. He said, I needed to know more about you. You're not from here. People here don't know you. I don't know you. So he said, what I did is I traveled to your village. I went to where you are. I went to where the place you call home. I went to the people, to be around the people who know you. And he said, I watched you. I watched you from a distance. You didn't know I was there, but I was. And he said, I spent a full day watching you. And I'm going to tell you now what I observed. And this is why I'm not going to give you permission to marry my daughter. He said, I'll started out positive. He said, I watched you. You went down to a factory and you loaded up the goods on your cart. And he said, you're a hard worker. He said, I was impressed by that. And you're strong. He said, you hefted that stuff around there, those heavy wooden crates and everything. You got it all loaded onto your cart. And he said, there was no fooling around. He said, you worked and you got the job done. And he said, that impressed me. I said, yes, this is the kind of man I want to be my daughter's husband and the father of my grandchildren. I'm impressed. And then you set off down the road, and he said, I followed at a distance, and I watched. And he said, at one point, the heavy cart got bogged down in the mud. And he said, you got off the cart, and he said, and you cussed out your mule, and you proceeded to savagely beat him. And he said, that was the first indication that there may be a problem. Because I looked at that and I said, well, my daughter can be kind of stubborn. She's not easily moved sometimes, she can be hard to deal with. What's going to happen when my daughter gets bogged down in her stubbornness like this mule is bogged down in the mud? Are you going to try to beat her into submission? You see, is this young man going to beat my daughter? This is what went through my mind. But still, I gave you the benefit of the doubt. He said you worked at it and you got the cart unstuck and you went off down. I thought, okay, he solved the problem. I don't like how he treated the mule there, but maybe he was just having a bad day. I don't know what's going on. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. One act of cruelty does not prove bad character. We've all had moments of weakness where we've acted differently than we should have. So he said, I gave you the benefit of the doubt. Then he said, when you got to the train station and you unloaded the goods, and again, you worked hard, and I was impressed with that. I saw how hard you work, and you're a hard-working young man, and I respect you for that. But he said, I noticed, because I listened in on the conversation, I got close enough that I could hear between yourself and the train master, and when it come to getting your pay, you told some untruths, you told some lies, and so you got paid more than you should have gotten paid. So you cheated the company out of money, is what you did there. And he said, I didn't like that because I thought, well, if he would cheat in his business dealings, maybe he would cheat in his personal life. Maybe he'd cheat on my daughter. Maybe he'd cheat my daughter or cheat on her. And so he said, that made me again leery of you. It made me wonder about you. It made me less inclined to allow you to marry my daughter. But then I thought, I've been in business. I know how it is. I haven't always been exactly honest and forthright in my business dealings. But he said, I've always been kind to my wife. I've always been kind to my children. And so, that does not necessarily mean that he would be a bad husband for my daughter or a bad father for my grandchildren. So again, I gave you the benefit of the doubt on that score, although at that point I had already made up my mind. And I already had decided I wasn't going to let you marry my daughter. And here is the reason. This is the thing that made my decision for me. He said at the end of the journey, when it came time, to stop the cart or whatever, and the mule had been chasing that carrot down the road all those miles, pulling that heavy cart, and even had to endure a beating from you at one point when the cart got bogged down in the mud. Through no fault of the mule's, really. It just happens, the road is muddy. It happens. And the cart is heavy. But still, the mule had to endure a beating from you and everything. So the mule did not have a good day. you know. And then what did you do? You took the carrot off the rope and the stick there, and you put the carrot in your pocket. You didn't allow the mule to have the carrot, and he said, that's what made my decision for me. He said, that showed me that you have a cruelty within you, and a lack of good character, and that you are not, basically it showed me that, the other lapses in judgment and the other things that I saw you do that I didn't approve of, I could give you the benefit of the doubt on those things. But he said, when you didn't give the mule the carrot, that showed me your true character. It showed me how miserable a person you really are. He said, I don't want somebody like that as my son-in-law. I don't want somebody like that in my family. I don't want somebody like that with my daughter. I don't want somebody like that to be the father of my grandchildren. And he said, and for that reason, sir, no, you may not marry my daughter. And he said, and it grieves me to have to tell you that, because when you came here last week, I genuinely liked you. And he said, that's one of the reasons I was so anxious to give you the benefit of the doubt when I saw other behaviors that I didn't approve of, and that caused me to wonder about you. But he said, not giving the mule the carrot at the end of the journey, he said that was just too much. I couldn't abide that. And so he said, that is the reason you may not marry my daughter. Anyway, that's the story. It made quite an impression on me when I was young. Many people now may say that it's an irrelevant story because the world has changed quite a bit. You no longer ask the father's permission to marry his daughter. We're not hauling stuff around on mule carts anymore. Those days are well and truly over for a long time. And those days were over when I was young, too. I mean, you didn't ask the father's permission to marry his daughter when I was a young man, and we didn't have mule carts and everything. We had trucks, to move goods. But by that time we did. So, like I say, but the story itself is relevant because it speaks to human nature, and that's why it's relevant. And it speaks to, well, I don't know, it just speaks to human nature, I guess. It speaks to the fact that you never know who's watching. You just never know who's watching, So it's good to be on your best behavior whenever you can be, and it's good to have a good character. It's good to cultivate that within yourself. And it's good to act in a principled way. See, that man, he saw a total lack of ethics and principle in the young mule driver because of not giving the mule the carrot at the end of the journey. That was the thing that really made his decision for him. Anyway. Snoring away there. He's pretty cute. He is. He's so cute. Anyway, that's the thing. Anyway, that's the story. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm going to now turn off the camera. We'll see you later.